My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. At this point in our chronological exploration of Nickelodeon's journey in the video game space, we've seen quite a lot of Rugrats representation. I've covered 8 Rugrats games so far, but the series is sort of starting to wind down at this point in time, at least when it comes to video games. There's actually only 2 OG Rugrats series games left on the slate after today's video, as well as the lone game based on All Grown Up. Today we head to the Game Boy Advance to cover Rugrats I Gotta Go Party, one of the more under the radar Rugrats games. Released on November 8, 2002, it was developed by Eurocom Entertainment Software. Starting out in the 90s, they worked on some pretty notable NES and SNES games, but it was their work a little later on that made them near and dear to my heart. They started churning out a bunch of Disney licensed games, including Tarzan, which was one of my favourite childhood games. Then they found themselves in charge of 2 video game juggernaut franchises. They developed Crash Bash, they ported The Wrath of Cortex to GameCube, and they were in charge of Spyro A Hero's Tale. Plus, they developed the GBA version of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and they made the GoldenEye remake we collectively decided to sweep under the rug and never talk about again. Sure, Eurocom had a heavy connection to licensed games, but looking at their history, it feels like a Rugrats handheld game is way beneath them. Unfortunately, I really couldn't find reviews for this game, so I Gotta Go Party is a bit of a mystery outside of having a weirdly gross name. Rugrats games have delivered for the most part so far. What will the latest entry add to the mix? Three words: minigame collection. Or maybe that's 2 words, I don't really know. The correct spelling of the term minigame is up for debate. Either way, we've got another one of these bastards to review. Not counting Nick Kart Racers 2 or Krusty Cook-Off, I've reviewed like 35 games in this series. By my count, at least 10 of those games have been some sort of compilation of minigames. Now, some of those games have been really good, but that's still a whole lot of games in basically the exact same style. It's especially repetitive when a lot of those minigame collections have also been Rugrats games. It feels like Groundhog Day going into I Gotta Go Party. Here your gameplay options are pretty standard. You've got single player and multiplayer, a single player story, and then quick play and free play mode. Quick play randomly chooses 10 different minigames for you to play through, while free play is exactly that. You're free to choose whatever game you want. Once you jump into the story mode, you'll find that the game is framed around hide and seek. You play as Tommy and have to find all of the other characters, except Susie Carmichael, who still appears on the end of game congratulations screen. Why is Susie always getting shafted? To find the babies, you'll be engaging in what is essentially a point and click game. You go around the various rooms of the Pickles house and spot the incredibly obvious hiding spots. Every time you click on a baby, you'll get a unique minigame, which I kind of have to give Eurocom props for. A lot of Nick minigame collections tend to repeat games. Each minigame requires you to hit a target score. Failing to reach it means you lose one of your 4 lives. This seems pretty tough on the surface, considering there are 24 minigames. In reality, you're never in any danger of failing on your hide and seek quest. Successfully beating minigames will restore your lives, and losing minigames itself doesn't see any negative consequences other than losing a single life. Anytime you lose a minigame, I Gotta Go Party just immediately brushes past it. You can't even try again if you want to. A game in this style lives and dies by the ideas and execution for the minigames. Rather than being an enjoyable romp like Search for Reptar or Studio Tour, this is such a bore. All of the gameplay in I Gotta Go Party is low effort, unimaginative, and unenjoyable to play. I don't think I experienced a single second of fun. This game was so bad that I'm just completely unenthusiastic while making this video. It's not a crazy, broken abomination that makes for a fun review. It's just this dull as fuck collection of games that wouldn't even be worth playing on a flash site. There are some sort of unique game ideas at times. One example is where you have to feed Spike. The surface level idea of these kinds of games spark interest, but the execution is so low effort. In this game, you have to make Spike either eat or drink. But this basically boils down to you mashing the D-pad to eat when prompted, and then pressing the A button to drink when prompted. Stuff like this barely counts as gameplay. When you can turn your brain off completely and breeze through everything, that's when you know a game is completely worthless. There's a minigame where you dig up bones that is essentially a baby version of Minesweeper, and a game where you have to dig up the most sand, which almost invokes the kind of feelings and style you'd see from a Mario Party minigame. But everything else is just basic and boring minigame ideas that have been beaten to death, or things that barely even count as gameplay. So many times I'd find a baby and end up playing through something ripped straight out of those 90s educational CD-ROM games.
Tim's got a cold.
There are multiple memory games, one game that's literally just doing a jigsaw puzzle, a game where you have to spot the odd image out that cycles through the same few images over and over, and a game where you have to sort toys into the correct toy box. The jigsaw puzzle, as well as the game where you have a puzzle that you need to unscramble, are quite hard to complete because of the strict time limit imposed on those games. In fact, in the case of the unscrambling one, I'd argue it's close to impossible to properly solve before you run out of time. The weird thing about I Gotta Go Party is that none of this matters. Like I said, failing doesn't have any real consequences, and then success or failure in games like these is decided so randomly. You'd imagine it would be pretty simple here. Did the player solve the puzzle? If yes, they won. Instead, it's based on how many pieces you put in the correct slot. So many games in I Gotta Go Party are like this. It honestly feels a little insulting. And I'm not joking even slightly when I say there are multiple games where you can just not touch the controls and still win. The best example is one of the sections which is very similar to the on-rails vehicle parts of the Rugrats 2D platformers. Here you need to collect 30 bottles as you float down a river. But so many of the bottles are just placed in your path that I could easily see somebody beating it without moving an inch. The only other minigame I'm even slightly motivated to talk about is the Kart Racer. Yes, this is another Nick title to include some form of kart racing. Impressively, this is probably the worst example of kart racing I've seen in my life. First off, the track and location you're racing on is straight up reused from an earlier game. Then you have the world's stiffest controls. Controlling your vehicle is so sluggish and immediately made me want to stop playing. Then you don't even have basic kart racer staples like items. There are like 2 speed boost things to drive over, but that's it. And to top it all off, the sound effect your kart makes after getting the speed boost is painful. Despite featuring 24 minigames, you'll complete I Gotta Go Party story mode in around 45 minutes. And no, going back and playing individual games or playing with friends is not at all appealing here. Essentially what we have is a very shit recreation of the super successful Search for Reptar and Studio Tour games. Those games were not only successful from a sales point of view, but they were also really well made games. They're not incredible works of art or totally revolutionary, but they had decent minigames and had the benefit of being the first time we got to explore the most iconic location of the show, in Search for Reptar's case, and a very unique premise for Studio Tour. In I Gotta Go Party, none of that is present. You're back to exploring Tommy's house, but this time in the most basic way possible. It's like looking at a slideshow of different rooms of the house. There's no interactivity. Even if this was the first time the show's locations were presented in video game form, this would be a letdown. But considering Search for Reptar already exists, it's an even bigger failure. I think the one argument to defend I Gotta Go Party is that it is very clearly aimed at a very, very young audience, but I don't think even this stands up well to fight off the mountain of issues standing before it. Many of the minigames you see here feel like the type of stuff you'd see in the games released for the Leapstar. It's just bare bones games designed to get really young kids puzzle solving and learning key cognitive skills in a fun way. On one hand, targeting that audience is super unique. You don't often see games going for a demographic that young on genuine video game consoles. But there's a good reason for that. By the time somebody is old enough to play a proper video game system, they've well and truly aged out of this kind of experience. Not many parents are buying a GBA for a literal baby. And even if this was what Eurocom was aiming for, which I have my doubts on, it still fails at that. There are numerous insane difficulty spikes. You'll go from something like playing an extremely basic memory game to the scrambled puzzle I mentioned earlier, and it's like night and day. A toddler isn't going to be able to handle that. No, I don't believe Eurocom's goal with this game was to target some kind of underserved audience on the GBA. I think they saw this as an easy way to make a quick buck while investing as little time and money into it as possible. In 2002, Eurocom released James Bond 007 Nightfire, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and ported Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex to the GameCube. Just examine that for a second. They made a home console game based on James Bond, one of the biggest franchises in the world. They made a handheld game based on Harry Potter, one of the biggest franchises in the world. And they also ported a Crash Bandicoot game, which was still one of the most iconic video game franchises at the time. So is it much of a surprise to see their GBA Rugrats title become an afterthought? Sure, Rugrats was a juggernaut too, but when you weigh it against those other games they were working on, it sort of falls out of favour. In the following year, they developed a game based on Buffy and released one of their only original IP games, Sphinx and the Cursed Mummy, which was apparently in development for several years. I have no doubt in my mind this was purely a quick cash grab to get a little extra money flow for the studio. I can't imagine this game took long to make, and looking at the credits, they clearly invested very little into I Gotta Go Party. By my count, Eurocom dedicated just 10 employees to working on this game. Honestly, I'm surprised that many people were involved. I'm not sure how many people exactly were working at Eurocom at this point in time, but when the studio shut down they had 200 employees. Just a little perspective for how small and insignificant this release was for them in the scheme of things. Unsurprisingly, being an afterthought means production-wise this game is completely unremarkable. Some of the sprite work is okay at best, but there are times, like in the racing sections, where the graphics are ugly as sin. Maybe it stands out so much because we've seen gorgeous sprite work for previous Rugrats games, but the visuals for I Gotta Go Party are just another aspect lacking any spark. This genuinely is the least excited I have ever been to review a game. Even less excited than the chess game Cartoon Network put out. I Gotta Go Party is so lifeless. The minigames are so basic and uninteresting, and they honestly left me with not a lot to talk about. The games aren't broken or glitchy, just boring as hell. Games like this aren't much fun to review. When something like Nickelodeon Party Blast stumbles along that is an unmitigated disaster, it sucks. But it also makes for a product that's fun to critique. Clearly this was a D-level project for Eurocom. I would imagine anything with Rugrats slapped on the box was a license to print money in 2002, so they saw that, capitalized on it, and were probably able to fund a bunch of other projects they were more passionate about, despite only dedicating 10 workers to this game. It's just so obvious there was no passion from anybody involved here. There's no reason for anybody to ever play Rugrats I Gotta Go Party. There are plenty of other Rugrats minigame collections on the market that actually do exude excitement and passion for the show and have genuinely fun gameplay to boot. Next time will hopefully be a less dour affair when I take a look at the Wild Thornberrys movie on GBA. Eliza and her family have hit the big screen, so of course it's time to cash in with a video game. I think it's interesting to look at both this and Hey Arnold the movie only being given the handheld treatment for their films. Clearly they're being treated as less than Jimmy Neutron or Rugrats in Paris. To make sure you catch that review as well as the impending Battle for Bikini Bottom review, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.